Tonight, the long goodbye. Mourners line Scottish streets for Her Majesty's final journey. Tears for the Queen as her coffin travels from Balmoral Castle to Edinburgh. Plus, King Charles addresses Parliament for the first time after being crowned, settling into his new role. An uncle's heart-wrenching final call from his niece, trapped in a sinking car with her best friend. A fly-in, fly-out worker armed with a 30-centimetre knife shot dead by police. And a heartache for small businesses. Debate raging tonight over a snap public holiday.
This is 9 News Perth with Michael Thompson.
Good evening. Mourners have lined the streets of Scotland from the countryside to small towns and villages as the Queen's coffin made its way from Balmoral Castle to Edinburgh. It's the first leg in a long journey before Queen Elizabeth is eventually laid to rest at Windsor Castle.
One last great journey through the gates of Balmoral Castle, a hearse carrying the Queen's coffin begins its 6-hour passage through the Scottish countryside, towns and villages. This was the home Queen Elizabeth loved so much, where she could lay her crown at the door and be herself. And that affection was returned by those who also call this home. Farmers in a guard of honour, their tractors lined in silent tribute, crowds 10 deep, in quiet contemplation of what has come to pass.
So it's been the one constant thing in the whole of our lives, the Queen. And she was a tiny little lady. I saw her once at an agricultural show in a Wellington boots with a scarf knotted under her chin, just getting on. Just feel very sad that she's no longer with us.
And everywhere, flowers and mementos and heartfelt emotion.
She loved Ballater, she loved Royal Deeside, and we loved her as well. So there was no question that we would not be here to see her off.
Elizabeth Alexander was born on the day of Queen Elizabeth's coronation in 1953.
It's just so sad, but privileged to be here and happy that we could say goodbye. And I think we'll miss seeing her going to church on Sundays. Yeah. It's all right.
Adele Phillips was a housekeeper to the Queen.
It was quite poignant, but I'm glad I was here to see it. I didn't know her in the way that the public do. I saw her in her little tweed skirt and headscarf and that kind of thing.
And 2 soldiers who swore allegiance to her.
It was an absolute pleasure to serve Her Majesty. She was our boss, and we hold a lot of pride in that.
For many here, this was the moment the Queen's death became real. And as her coffin passed, it was a chance to give thanks for her life of service. In town after town, village after village, people stood waiting for that brief chance to be near their Queen for one last time. At almost every point of this 281-kilometre journey, and from every vantage point, people came, waited and gave thanks.
I kind of felt like she was the nation's gran. I had to come and pay my respects.
This part of the journey did have an end, Edinburgh, across the Queen's Ferry Bridge and into the city. And again, its streets lined at every turn, the enormous crowds bursting into spontaneous applause. This is the moment the crowds here on the Royal Mile have been waiting for, the Queen's coffin arriving here in Edinburgh on its way to the palace. Old and young from every walk of life, all united in this passing of history.
I think it's very symbolic for Scotland because obviously she's, loves Scotland, she loves Balmoral, she loves Edinburgh, so for her to pass in Scotland is a very touching moment for the Scottish people.
You've heard a lot of people saying she was like the nation's granny, and everyone can kind of relate her death in their own family to her death now, and in a way it's emotional in that way, I think.
I just felt so sad. So sad.
She's been on the throne for a long time. So, yeah, it means a lot. Sorry.
And here, as elsewhere, flowers, cards and messages for the only monarch most had known.
Everybody was very respectful, and it's a massive privilege. She's celebrating a life well lived. She was a good lady and we'll miss her. She'll be missed.
In that procession, a solemn Anne, the Princess Royal, a final undertaking of devotion, the burden of deep heartache etched on her face. The cortege finally entered the grounds of the Palace of Holyrood House, where the Queen had stayed only weeks earlier. Draped in the royal standard of Scotland, the Queen's coffin was carried into the palace. Ahead of its next journey to St Giles Cathedral, where for 24 hours people will be able to file past and pay their respects. For a dutiful and loving daughter, it will no doubt mean so much.
Damien Ryan is at St Giles Cathedral, where Her Majesty's coffin will lie at rest. Damien, large crowds are gathering there.
Yeah, she may be the British monarch, but to these people, she certainly is the Queen of Scots. Crowds have gathered outside this 13th century cathedral since dawn, and once the cortege arrives from up the Royal Mile, there will be a service inside the cathedral attended by the royal family to officially receive this coffin. And later this evening, a first in this long goodbye, the people of Scotland will be able to pay their respects, filing past the coffin inside this cathedral. The Crown of Scotland will sit atop her oak coffin. There will be long queues, no doubt, here tonight and tomorrow for that to happen. And then following that, of course, the final leg of this farewell tour, the Queen will head to London and for her funeral next Monday.
Thank you. Europe correspondent Carrie-Anne Greenbank is outside Holyrood House. And Carrie, what happens from here?
Well, in the coming hours, King Charles and Queen Consort Camilla will be flying into Edinburgh, where they will be arriving here at the palace. When they're inside the gates, there'll be plenty of pomp and pageantry. There'll be a traditional ceremony known as the Ceremony of the Keys, where the keys to the city are presented to the new king. From there, King Charles and other members of the royal family will be walking in the procession along with the Queen's coffin as it makes its way down the Royal Mile to St Giles Cathedral.
Kari, thank you. The new king is settling into his role, resuming official duties. Proclamation ceremonies have been held across the UK for a sovereign being welcomed with open arms.
If the royal family was apprehensive about how King Charles would be received, they needn't have worried. The mere glimpse of His Majesty's Rolls-Royce crawling through London, enough to lift the spirits of a sombre crowd.
It's very emotional, actually, to see our new king. Really, really exciting.
Duty had called him to Buckingham Palace for a meeting with the Secretary-General of the Commonwealth and tea with representatives from across the realm.
It's going to be a great era. We'll do our best.
Work, a welcome distraction for the grieving couple. The Queen Consort holding court with Australia's acting High Commissioner, Lynette Wood.
I love it. I love the Australians. I love the way that everybody says what they think.
The diplomat tasked with passing on the sentiments of a nation.
I was able to convey personally to their Majesties the condolences of the government and people of Australia. And His Majesty's warmth for our country was evident in our brief conversation this afternoon.
The Prime Minister will do the same when he lands on Friday ahead of the Queen's funeral in a week.
It will be a proud moment to represent Australia at these events.
Across the United Kingdom, the modern monarch is honoured in age-old ceremonial proclamations.
That the Prince Charles Philip Arthur George is now, by the death of our late sovereign Charles III.
Momentous change of title hailed in Scotland.
3 cheers for His Majesty the King.
And heralded in Northern Ireland.
God save the King.
God save the King.
While in Wales, centuries-old customs stand out as quaint and quirky. But this is all just a grand old way of wishing a sovereign good luck.
Bless His Majesty with long and happy years to reign over us.
His decades of practice may not make perfect, but they must count for something. In London, Charles Croucher, 9 News.
A short time ago, King Charles was at the Palace of Westminster addressing Parliament for the first time as King. Brett McLeod is at Buckingham Palace. And Brett, it was an important speech for the newly appointed monarch.
Really laying down his official mark as king and also making his statement as the man who's leading effectively that prestigious building with 1,000 years of history. Now, he went in there accompanied by his consort, Camilla, and heard some wonderful speeches by the Leader of the House of Commons who said, "Deep as our grief is, we know yours is deeper." Poor Charles, in a very rare moment for any monarch, addressed both Houses of Parliament inside the Great Hall of Westminster, where his mother will lie in state in a few days' time. Let's have a listen to some of that speech.
As I stand before you today, I cannot help but feel the weight of history which surrounds us and which reminds us of the vital parliamentary traditions to which members of both houses dedicate yourselves with such personal commitment for the betterment of us all. We gather today in remembrance of the remarkable span of the Queen's dedicated service to her nations and peoples. While very young, Her late Majesty pledged herself to serve her country and her people and to maintain the precious principles of constitutional government which lie at the heart of our nation. This vow she kept with unsurpassed devotion. She set an example of selfless duty, which, with God's help and your counsels, I am resolved faithfully to follow.
King Charles reflecting on his mother and the Mother of Parliaments, which Westminster is. And that was a very poignant speech and comes at a time of deep reflection across the United Kingdom, particularly yesterday, Sunday morning, church services where there were prayers offered up for the new King and the Queen.
Call to worshippers for services the likes of which most had never experienced.
It really struck us because in the prayers normally we would be praying for the Queen, and this is the first time we've been in church and it was the prayers were for the King.
The first Sunday prayers since the Queen's passing. Devotion meeting emotion.
She was just like the nation's grandma, weren't she? Everyone just loved her.
The Queen always said she took strength from her faith, and many tried to follow her example.
And I cried. Everybody here, you'll see them all crying.
Her successor as the head of the Church of England given the highest praise from the Archbishop of Canterbury, comparing the King to his mother.
King Charles III has the same ability to see the value of each person as God sees them.
Our new King will need our support and our prayers.
One of London's main tourist attractions, Westminster Abbey, is now closed to visitors ahead of the state funeral. Only the faithful allowed in for services, like Sam and Debbie from Brisbane.
Very moving and, tremendous tribute.
This church has been part of royal tradition for almost 1,000 years. Worshippers have taken the chance to reflect on what it will be like here for the Queen's farewell.
We normally go to another church, but we decided that today we wanted to be here because we wanted to, we just wanted to be close to the Queen.
Westminster's Dean giving an idea of the tone of the state funeral.
It's an opportunity for us to grieve. It's an opportunity for us to try and put some of our gratitude and remembrance into words.
In London, Brett McLeod, 9 News.
For the first time since his beloved grandmother died, Prince Harry has spoken of his loss, sharing this emotional statement. Granny, While this final parting brings us great sadness, I am forever grateful for all of our first meetings, from my earliest childhood memories with you to meeting you for the first time as my Commander-in-Chief, to the first moment you met my darling wife and hugged your beloved great-grandchildren. I cherish these times shared with you and with many other special moments in between. You are already sorely missed. We smile knowing that you and Grandpa are reunited now. The one-off public holiday to mark the Queen's death is putting businesses under the pump with little notice. Some say they'll lose tens of thousands of dollars, but the Prime Minister has hit back at critics of the snap decision.
For small business, a snap public holiday is no picnic.
Most of our catering companies are already cancelling for next Thursday.
Mark Togini is already counting the cost of losses to both his catering business,
Be about $10,000 to $15,000 worth of work that we'll lose next Thursday.
and the cafe he runs that will close out of respect for the Queen.
Probably another $7,000 or $8,000 in turnover that we won't do for the day.
Mark Bayliss is bewildered by the timing.
Friday would have been better. It's disruptive for a small business.
Others complain of the suspension of critical surgery.
There's a lot of mixed messages out there, and I suggest that if anyone's got anything scheduled on the 22nd, to contact their doctor to find out whether it's on or not.
But the Prime Minister is following a long-settled plan.
A one-off public holiday and a national day of mourning is an appropriate response.
Anthony Albanese says it's a one-day pause to mark a life of service.
Australia needs to and wants to give thanks to the contribution of Queen Elizabeth II as our head of state for 70 years.
There'll be celebratory and recognition activities of the passing of the Queen, but also the welcoming of the new monarch. But there will be surcharges attached to that.
Staff are nearly on double their normal wage, which is great for them, get some extra money in their pocket. But hopefully the sales come through, and I think it's an important day to stay open at the same time.
And the vast majority probably agree with Robert.
I think it's fantastic. I think it's another day of rest and recuperation for everyone.
And what are his plans?
Probably go to the beach.
Which is a very Australian way of paying respect. Chris Ullman, 9 News.
Kelly Hayward is here with your weather details. And Kelly, a stormy night ahead.
Oh, it is, Tomo. So batten down the hatches, because you may have felt the beginning of it if you spend any time outside this afternoon. Now, here is what we can expect over the next 24 hours. There is a low pressure system working its way across the coast at the moment. Those in the southwest are being told to prepare for fierce winds, thunderstorms and up to 80 millimetres of rain. Now, you can see just how heavy this rain is that we will be expecting. This is here in the city, the heaviest downpours expected around midnight and then into the early hours of tomorrow and then during the day. But those showers will ease significantly by the evening, but they don't disappear. I will tell you when the sun returns a little later in the bulletin. Tomo?
Could be a wild night ahead. Kelly, thank you. Next, shock attack. An elderly man killed by a kangaroo in our Great Southern. Plus, an uncle's heart-wrenching final call for help from 2 young women trapped in their sinking car. The disturbing lead-up to a fatal police shooting outside a northern suburbs home. The torn-up letter that led police to an accused murderer in a wheelie bin mystery. And hospitals strike fears as a powerful WA union rejects a 3% pay rise.